New regulations for stretch limousines are now law in New York after Governor Andrew Cuomo signed a series of bills on the issue this week. The legislation was proposed after 20 people died in a tragic accident in Schoharie County. The crash made national news and prompted action by the state legislature. Assemblyman Angelo Santabarbara helped craft the package of bills signed by Cuomo this week. He's with me now in studio to talk more about them. Thanks for being here, Assemblyman.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. So I want to put some context to the Schoharie limo crash. We found out from prosecutors that it may have been caused by some neglect of the vehicle's brakes. Tell me how the package of bills may prevent another accident like this one.
Well, as you said, it was a pretty significant package of bills. It changes the way limousine operators, it changes the regulations here in New York and the way they operate across the state. There was a lot of input from the families. The families were advocates for the changes, and the bill is aimed at strengthening regulations. Some of the bills are aimed at improving safety for passengers. Among the bills, I think the most important bills, it was a 10-bill package. The most important bill is DOT will now have the power to impound and immobilize vehicles that fail safety inspections. So there's no chance of these vehicles getting back on the road. I think that's a very significant change, something new for DOT, the power they didn't have in the past. So that is perhaps the most significant change out of the bills. So I think that is going to help with safety and make sure that the safety inspections are addressed before any vehicle could be on the road.
And in the context of the Schoharie crash, and we should mention that this is based on more than one accident in New York State, in the context of the Schoharie crash, that bill is important because and correct me if I'm wrong, the limo actually failed a safety inspection, but the owners put it back on the road.
And that's exactly what happened. It was a vehicle that should have never been on the road. But in addition to that, when you look at the investigations that have gone into this Schoharie crash, the National Transportation Safety Board released their initial report and pointed out a number of glaring flaws. And one of the things they talked about is seatbelts. There was, the seatbelt equipment was not available to every passenger. Not only could you if you wanted to wear one, you couldn't wear one. So that was addressed. Those issues were addressed in this bill package, which points out the need. This is a significant package. It talks about a new class of driver's license you're going to need to operate one of these limousines, alcohol and drug testing, pre-employment drug testing, but the consumer part of it too, to be able to, when a limousine shows up, to be able to match up the information on a website, report violations, consumer protections. Like prom season came around last year and people were just afraid to hire limousines, to have their kids in a limousine. There needs to be some way for me as a consumer to be able to check to make sure it's the proper driver, to make sure the vehicle has passed inspection. The Department of Transportation will not provide that information. You'll be able to check it on a smartphone. There'll be a 1-800 hotline to be able to report violations, and a number of other consumer protections there, which I think was very important.
One that you mentioned is kind of this enhanced license or a new license for these drivers. I think it would surprise some people to know that before these laws, if you were driving a stretch limousine, you didn't have to have any kind of special license.
Yeah, and you're responsible for, in this case, it was 20 people in a limousine. You should have enhanced driver's license, a license that a special driver's license to operate one of these vehicles. And you talk to the limousine companies that are operating in New York. This bill package, a lot of the limousine companies were accepting of the changes. I think that what we're trying to do here is get the bad operators out of New York. Make sure they're not operating, making sure they're not putting people in danger. Making sure that the vehicles are meeting the strictest of standards, which in New York State now with this bill package, we are leading the way. And as you mentioned in your opening remarks, that this made national news.
Yeah.
This was the worst transportation disaster in nearly a decade. And for that matter, the entire world took note of what happened here. So all eyes were on us and what we were going to do. I give a lot of credit to the families. They were advocates for these bills. They had a lot of input on the bill package that was passed. They were up at the Capitol when the bills were passed. And their next stop is Washington, D.C. And I urge members of Congress, Senate leaders, the President to come together to take up a bill package that covers every state. We need to make sure tragedies like this don't happen ever again. No family should ever have to go through such a tragic, devastating loss.
And we already have that push at the federal level by some of the local representatives here in Congress, and I believe the senators from New York State as well. Has there been any update since they pushed that last year, or what's the status of that?
They actually came to the city of Amsterdam, where a lot of the families had ties to Amsterdam, in the Schoharie limousine crash, to talk about a bill package. I urge them to look at what we did here and to adopt a lot of what we put into this package. We are hoping to get an update soon. I know there's a lot going on in Washington, D.C., but this is an important issue. And one of the things I mentioned is that, I called on the governor to sign these bills as soon as possible, because with every day that goes by, these protections were not in place. And the same can be applied to every state, whether it's California, Texas, Florida, wherever the case may be. There may be people in danger that are in stretch limousines that do not have these protections, and that's just unacceptable.
All right, Assemblyman Angelo Santabarbara, thank you so much for being on New York Now this week.
Thank you. Great to be here.